Right. Now we're talking about corporate travel, and Dave, what about corporate travel in terms of how, there's been a discussion about cutting back on corporate travel on a national level. There's been some suggestion that corporate travel should be cut back. So how does that impact you? Has it impacted you?
My company concentrates primarily on just the leisure customer, whereas Jerry's company has a lot of group business, but it affects everybody because it's a base business for our destination here that's booked usually well in advance, and it comes with a lot of ancillary services. And the unfortunate fallout of what sometimes in our industry we call the AIG effect, where these AIG guys right at the peak of the bailout went off into a hoity-toity resort to have a retreat,
Scoundrels.
which caused,
I'm just kidding.
which caused the government to react necessarily.
Right.
But unfortunately what happened is in that reaction, people said, uh-oh, group travel to nice and exotic places, of which Hawaii has done a great job in positioning ourselves, virtually stopped.
Right.
And while that's maybe morally correct vis-a-vis the travelers, what was forgot is the impact on the communities. So when a big group business doesn't come here, that means there's no business for the taxi driver. Right. That means the doorman doesn't get to deal with somebody's car and check them in. It means the housekeepers aren't working that day. It means the food supplier, the liquor supplier, the entertainer, the sound check guy, the activities, the attractions, they don't have any chance to get those convention business players to come. To my way of thinking, that would have been some of the very best stimulus money that the federal government could have encouraged. It's just unfortunate that it didn't evolve that way.
Right. So
we're all feeling the pain.
Right. And you have a lot of impact with the corporate travel.
Absolutely. The group business for larger hotels is so important. If you look at a mix between group and transient, utopian would be like 40-60 in a hotel. And now those numbers are down in the teens. So you're looking at maybe 18, 72, whatever, 1882. And that trickle-down effect of that group business is so important to look at, because you're not getting the ancillary spend, and that's very important. That goes outside the business, outside the hotel, with the different activities and the food venues and the group spend on everything that they do. Huge impact.
Well, I want to definitely talk about some of the agencies that the government agencies and how the taxpayer funds are used to help in Hawaii, to help the tourism industry market itself. But who could give a better picture of that? Dave, do you want to try that?
Well, I was around when it got started.
Okay, give us the history of
that. For years, the Hawaii Visitors and Convention Bureau was the only source, and it was essentially privately funded by member companies, and it received some government funding. As I said earlier, when we went through the 90s and we were in despair, we realized we didn't have enough money to globally compete with some of the other growing destinations in the world. So,
what are some of those destinations? The
Mexico, the Caribbean, Spain, Europe, Florida, California, internal destinations in the United States. And now we have tons of growing resorts in Asia. You got Bali, you got Vietnam is coming, Thailand, Australia, New Zealand. I mean, there are lots. Whereas when I first started in the business, Hawaii was really one of the special places that you took a vacation, but that's now changed.
Yeah.
So the industry got together with the legislative leaders and said, well, we will fall on the sword and we'll agree or support an increase in taxes so long as we take those taxes and turn around and collectively then use those dollars to market the state of Hawaii. And that's how the Tourism Authority got born. And then the Tourism Authority was then the agency in charge of how those marketing dollars got spent. Then the Tourism Authority then turns around and hires different groups to go out and execute those marketing plans. In North America, it's the Hawaii Visitors and Convention Bureau. In Japan, it's Hawaii Tourism Japan. There are other agencies in the other, what are called major market areas around the world. And the Tourism Authority's job is to make sure that money gets done, and they're also responsible for running the measurement of how well we're doing in the industry. But the voice of Hawaii in North America is the HVCB.
So how do the two agencies work? Is the HTA kind of a quasi-government agency, or is it still private and it's got government funding? How does that work?
That's a really good question. I mean, it's legislatively authorized to be a government agency. Yes. The employees that work there are actually employees of state government.
Yes. Okay.
And the money comes from the tax coffers. Now, the hotel guys like me would say, hey, we're paying for that.
through the Hawaii tourism
through the hotel
tax,
transient accommodation
Right.
tax or hotel room tax. So every day we pay, a percent of our revenues into that fund, and gladly to do that, provided it's spent well.
And how does that work with the HV, which is the Hawaii Visitor and Convention Bureau, which is another agency? What is the difference between the two? One is just on marketing?
Well,
Is that how it works?
That's exactly right, because HTA then contracts with the Hawaii Visitors and Convention Bureau to do the marketing in North America, as they do contracting in Japan for Hawaii Tourism Japan to do the marketing in Japan. So then they oversee that contract and work with those contractors to ensure that their results and everything they're doing are measurable.
And they're literally doing the communication pieces to the different destinations and going out and visiting them and doing the road shows and the conventions in destinations. So they're effective.
And the Tourism Authority does one other thing. It's also really the agency, I guess, if you will, that does planning on behalf of the tourism industry. And it is also responsible for measuring community sentiment and how do people feel about it. So recently in the news here, there was a survey that was released, which is done periodically, which they look at resident sentiment. In other words, are we meeting the needs of residents in addition to the business? So that's something that the Tourism Authority also does. And then gives it guidance for its policy for the kinds of programs it should implement.
Can I go back for
Sure,
just a minute?
sure.
Because I think David was maybe a little shy in actually talking about how the HTA was actually formed. I mean, if you think about this, what other industry would go hat in hand to the legislature and say, raise my taxes? We want you to raise the taxes, but we want to use the addition of those dollars for a particular cause. And that's basically what the hoteliers on all of the islands did, is they went in and they said, we need a dedicated source of funding to compete globally on marketing, to bring visitors here so that we have a thriving economy moving forward. And to be able to get those marketing dollars, we agree to an increase in taxes.
Now, what are the challenges? Because we know our legislature, I do, I'm down there every day. Sometimes they do the little thing called rating. And, and there's been a discussion with the governor taking the tourism tax. So once you have a tax, there's a danger that it goes into a special fund, it's going to get rated. So what are the challenges with that?
Well, I think there's several challenges. I mean, I think the goal from us sitting here and from others that are reliant on the visitor industry, and I don't mean just directly reliant on the visitor industry, but those that are indirectly reliant on the industry, is to ensure that our legislators are educated in regards to where the majority of the revenue for the state actually comes from. And by rating that fund, it would be a disservice to our revenue generation potential, because any rating of it would decrease the marketing efforts and then would cease our competitiveness.
Stated another way, we've told legislators that the investment that the state makes in marketing tourists to the world is one of the few things they have that actually provides a real return on its investment. Because the numbers, and there have been studies over years that it's somewhere between 2 to 9 to 1 return on the marketing dollars invested versus the tax dollars and spending dollars that come back. It's one of the very, very few things that the state has in its bag of tricks to raise revenues. So the advocacy, and yet it's always tempting in the legislative environment to spend on your particular constituents or area's particular need.
Who's down there protesting the loudest?
Well, yeah, I mean, there are lots
Right.
of voices
That's true.
out there. And so the challenge that the industry always faces is to remind, our policymakers, wait a minute, when we market and we bring people here, it adds new money to our economy and pays for all the rest of this stuff.
Right.
If we do that well, there will be enough to go around. And as you've seen now, when our revenues fall off by, I don't know what the number is, $741 million, that's probably $90 million worth of taxes that don't go into the system, which compounds the problem with the legislature. So my advice, the industry's advice, is don't back off on the marketing in these tough times or we're going to be in bigger trouble.